Here's what I really wanted to explain to you. So there was a research study that was done just recently. We're talking about 2017. And in 2017, they studied the effect of perceived stress on Epstein Barr virus titers in Appalachian women. So these women, they were basically anywhere between 18 to 26 years old. There's 169 females. And basically they do this survey of perceived stress. So how do they see their lives as stressful and control over their life? And if you're interested in the survey that they did, just email me or DM me or ask me in the thread, and I'll send you the link so you can fill out that perceived stress index. But the perceived stress index is now quantifiable, meaning you can use it for research studies, and you can say, okay, we're going to test you before, we're going to measure your antibodies, and we're going to see if the ones with the highest perceived stress scores have the highest antibodies or whatnot. And ultimately, that is what they found. Is they actually studied the VCA IgG antibodies. We'll get into that in a second. And ultimately, they found that these women had a higher titer if they had higher perceived stress. And that's a correlation that was significant, and meaning it wasn't just a random chance. They also found, interesting enough, that the more social support they had, the lower their titers were. So think about that for yourself. If you perceive yourself as having a lot of stress, it's going to weaken your immune system and cause higher levels of antibodies to reactivate. And if you are socially insulated and you have the ability to have a support system, you're going to feel more control and less titers. And that's what it's really important when we talk about the HPA axis and perception of stress. I just came out with my Overcoming Overwhelm course, and in that course we teach you how to think about stress and how to redefine stress so that your perceived stress is lower, even though the amount of stress may be the same or higher. And that's not to just walk around with your head in the air thinking that this is not a stressful thing. It's just redefining how it's impacting you and how you think about it to be able to modulate your immune system. But I thought it was pretty amazing study. But this is really important, and this is what is not being taught in medical schools. A lot of functional doctors do not understand it. And it really comes down to the model of the environment. So we have pesticides and sprays and pollutants and molds and EMFs and exhausts and fumes. Then we also have your stress. We have viruses, we have pathogens, and then internal things like glutamate and histamines and iron chaperoning, and the way we process these chemicals and toxins and the way that we produce energy in the body ultimately stimulates your mast cells. And when your mast cells are being stimulated, it creates a cytokine storm. And when you get exposures to EBV, so please send me this study from 2017. It's just, I just left a high stress job and I could not function. Yeah, I'll put the link to that study as well. But ultimately, we are looking at when the environmental triggers, whether it's perceived or not, and you can modulate it through your perception, but you can't go into a chemically moldy or pesticide-y food thing and just think positive about it, and it's not going to impact you, obviously. But when you have your mast cells that are being stimulated, that's important. You need to be able to produce a cytokine reaction to be able to kill and deal with and modulate the stressors and the threats to your body. And ultimately, when you get exposed to EBV, it causes those cytokines to further be produced. So if your bucket is already overflowing, or you already have a close to overflowing bucket, then that EBV is more likely to reactivate. Does that make sense? And that's what we're seeing even with COVID is that a lot of the people that are getting the most sick, they're already primed. They have high perceived stress, they have immune weaknesses, they have chemical exposures, they have uncontrolled inflammation, they have growth factors, that aren't being turned off. They're not able to get into recycle mode or autophagic strategies, and ultimately they now get the proverbial straw that breaks the camel's back, and the COVID or the Epstein Barr virus is enough to put them over the top, and that's really what's happening. But it's really important because the environment, pollutants, the exhaust, the fumes, contamination, the water, the solvents, the EMFs, glutamate and histamine in our bodies, iron oxidation, molds, any pathogens. We're not just talking about viral pathogens, we're talking about yeast and candida, and we're talking about parasites and bacteria and H. pylori and clostridia. The problem is that when we eat foods that are make-believe foods, that's what Dr. Marshall would say, the mausoleum of the shopping grocery store, where you want to just stick to the outer aisles and not go into the inner aisles, and how we cook the snot out of our foods at such high temperatures, and the minerals are so depleted that we're not getting the nutrients from our foods. Then we become nutrient deficient. Then we have more likelihood for infections and viral loads that will reactivate and stimulate that mast cell HPA axis thing. And actually, let's go back, because I wanted to show you, once the mast cells are stimulated, then the mast cells will stimulate your HPA axis and cause cortisol release. So that's why a lot of people that will have Epstein Barr virus will have a lot of the adrenal fatigue symptoms as well, where you have, and again, adrenal fatigue, right? Does it mean that cortisol is no longer being produced, like the doctor wants to tell you, hey, there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue? When we do an ACTH stimulation test, cortisol is still being produced. So there's no such thing as adrenal fatigue. Go on and don't let the door hit you on the way out. To me, that's very brazen, because what's happening is you're still stimulating the HPA axis. You're still causing a boatload of cortisol to be produced. You're still stimulating a feedback inhibition to the HPA axis. That's creating a whole bunch of downstream challenges with blood flow away from your parasympathetic to your sympathetic muscles. You're getting into catecholamine releases. You're getting into excitatory neurotransmitters. Those excitatory neurotransmitters will go downhill in a snowball avalanche with all of those cytokines, and ultimately it will drive your mitochondria into the ground. But there's no such thing as a cortisol adrenal fatigue thing. To me, that's unacceptable. Like, come up with a new definition, but let's agree to disagree that this is a major problem, that whether you call it adrenal fatigue or not, you have Epstein Barr virus reactivation, you have mast cell activation, you have cytokine storms, you have stimulation of your HPA axis, and you have dysregulation of your hormones. And at the end of the day, you have a supply and demand problem where your body doesn't have enough supply to meet the demand. And as a result, your body makes important decisions about the supply that it does have, just like you would is if you had so much expenses in your life and you had very little income. You're going to make decisions like, we're not going out for dinner, we're not buying new shoes, we're not going on vacations. But when it gets really bad, it's like, okay, what do? Do we get food, or do we keep the power on? Or do we buy gas, or do we be able to, do we ever be able to pay this, that, or the other? That's what's happening at the cellular level in your body. And when that happens, your body has to make important decisions. And when it gets really bad, you'll see things like autonomic nervous system issues. So standing up, get lightheaded and you faint. Or you can't cool your body down because it's too hot. Or you can't increase your body temperature because it's too cold. Or you have panic, anxiety, overwhelm. All of those things are telling me that at the cellular level, you have a huge demand and supply problem, and ultimately that could be a cause and effect of the viral reloading or the viral reactivating. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense to you.
Hey there, I hope you're getting tremendous value out of our videos. If you are, make sure you like our videos, subscribe to our YouTube channel, turn on your alert buttons, and then check out the description below, because I have a free masterclass that will teach you how to 10x your energy levels in the next 12 weeks and finally end your energy and exhaustion nightmare.